Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at another premium warship in World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to be taking a look at this, the Tier 5 Japanese battleship, Mutsu. As usual, I'm going to start with a little bit of history, move into the stats, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. I will go ahead and leave a time index in the description below for any of you who want to skip ahead. So first of all, the Mutsu was the second of two Nagato-class dreadnoughts built for the Imperial Japanese Navy following the Russo-Japanese War, which was a war that we Westerners have cleverly named to depict the conflict between Russian and Japanese forces that took place in 1904 and 1905. Though not widely studied in places like the United States, if my education is any indication, the Russo-Japanese War was actually the first time that a major European power failed to defeat an Eastern nation in a major military conflict. Whether or not you think that the Russians were truly defeated in the war, or if they had to simply sue for peace because of their internal problems, the Japanese were wise enough to understand that their victory was influenced by the internal problems in Russia and their ability to quickly leverage a very powerful and motivated army and navy against the Tsar's forces in a moment of political and military weakness, as it was their mastery of the art of modern war. And though there is, I'm told, a substantial amount of water between the United States and Japan, the construction of additional American warships was also influential to the Japanese producing more battleships like the Nagato and Mutsu. The Mutsu participated in the Second Sino-Japanese War, that is between China and Japan, where she performed shore bombardment missions and troop transport. During World War II, she certainly traveled here, there, and everywhere, but was always pretty close to the action without ever really getting stuck into any of it, including being part of the fleet that attacked Pearl Harbor, as well as being at the Battle of Midway. Then, on June 8, 1943, the Mutsu suddenly and violently exploded while at port. What exactly happened to the Mutsu is something of a mystery. It's obvious that the main battery of the ship detonated, tearing the hull in two. However, why the ship exploded like that has been the cause for some debate. The most popular theory is that a suicidal crewman accused of theft caused the explosion, though there are other theories, including an electrical fire or an attack on the Mutsu by Allied midget submarine. Though since there are no Allied powers that are interested in taking credit for this, even in the absence of truth, that seems somewhat unlikely. In total, more than 1,100 men died as a result of the explosion, were trapped, or drowned as a result of the ship sinking. As we get into the gameplay, as far as stats go, I actually can't point to a time when the Mutsu would have been armed exactly like this, but this seems to be trying to portray the Mutsu before its refit in 1934, but it seems to have either too many funnels or it doesn't have the right number of torpedo tubes, among other things. That said, nothing is perfect, and if I really wanted to complain about this ship, the lack of the underwater torpedo tubes wouldn't be the first item on my list. So as we compare these stats, I'm going to kind of talk about the Mutsu next to the Fuso, the other Tier 5 Japanese tech tree battleship, and the Nagato, its Tier 6 sister ship. As always, I do recommend that you have played up to at least the Fuso, if not the Nagato, before considering your purchase here, but anyway, let's have at it. As we go into survivability, your survivability is generally just a little bit better than the Fuso. You have more armor, and you have slightly more hit points. That said, you don't have a ton of armor, and your torpedo defense is around 12% less than the Fuso. So it's not all wins, but for the most part, having more hit points is probably better. When we look at artillery, you have 4x2 410mm cannons. They range out with this configuration, which is the most range that I can get on this ship, to about 17 kilometers. They reload within 30 seconds and traverse 180 degrees in around 36. Now, that said, with the same commander, This range is actually somewhat less than the Fuso. Your reload is around 2 seconds longer, and your guns do turn around the ship quite a bit faster. You are pumping out an extra 20% per shell in terms of damage, but you essentially only have 2/3 of the shells because the Fuso, of course, has 6 turrets with 2 guns each. That means actually your overall damage potential per salvo is somewhat lower in the Mutsu, even though the individual hits can be significantly more damaging. Now, if you are thinking that these are basically the Nagato's guns, you are going to be a little bit disappointed. The Nagato's guns stretch out an extra 5 or 10% in terms of their ultimate range. They do reload slightly quicker than the Nagato's, but they have the same turret traverse. Each one of the Nagato shells, when fully upgraded, will do a little bit more than the Mutsu. The Mutsu has 4 single-fire torpedo tubes. It's 2 to each side, and before you get too excited, the torpedo angles on this ship are pretty limited. Basically, if you've ever played the Yubari, you know how that ship likes to shoot torpedoes basically directly out each side. You do not have good angles either to the forward or aft of your ship, and so these are somewhat limited in terms of their usefulness. Now, they do stretch out to 7 kilometers, which isn't bad, and at 57 knots, they're a hair on the slow side. I would consider these mostly defensive or sort of deterrent type torpedoes, and my guess is that they'll be most effective at convincing other ships not to get too close to you, rather than they will actually add much to your damage potential. For anti-aircraft defense, the Mutsu has, of the 3 ships we're kind of looking at, the worst anti-aircraft defense. In fact, it has pretty terrible close-range anti-air and not very great long-range anti-air. Ultimately, though, this doesn't really matter right now, so again, might not be a big deal in the long run. For maneuverability, the Mutsu is very similar to the Nagato. It has the same turning radius and the same rudder shift as its big sister ship, but it is about 1.4 knots faster, so I would give this one to the Mutsu ultimately, and that does make it a little bit more interesting to maneuver than the Fuso. And then we look at stealth. If you consider a battleship stealthy in any possible way, then I guess the Mutsu is the stealthiest of these 3 ships. That is not by a whole heck of a lot, and I'm not really sure what it's worth to you. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into some gameplay. And as we do that, let me just start by saying this is going to be a little bit different than most of my gameplays, mostly because usually I try to pick a replay that I think is really indicative of, how the ship performs and isn't like really hyping your expectations. The thing about it is that I do not like the Nagato as a boat, and I consequently don't really like the Mutsu very much either. So I kind of feel like I don't want to give you like a super terrible opinion of this ship, but I simply don't enjoy the way that this plays. It's a fairly inaccurate ship, and as you see, we're going to be playing this entire replay a little bit faster than normal. There we were speeding up quite a bit to kind of get us into things, and really kind of at the beginning of this game, you're going to see the thing that what makes me most incapable of liking this ship. Essentially, that is that its accuracy always seems to let me down. And yeah, you've got these big, beautiful battleship guns, and sometimes you can actually hit things, but they're really, really inconsistent, and I understand TacticAngel, you like the Graf-Spee. It's essentially not a whole lot worse off in terms of accuracy than the actual Mutsu. However, it's also like half of the size of this ship, and it's not significantly more vulnerable unless you drive, broadside out into the middle of anywhere, in which case both ships are going to take just a ton of damage. There you see another thing that the Mutsu does quite a bit. Overpen things. This is going to be actually a pretty significant problem at closer range. You can do a decent amount of damage with just overpens, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of ships. I think of like the Nuremberg in particular, that you shoot and the shell goes straight in one side through the citadel and out the other side, doing almost no damage. Simply because the shells are actually, if you want to put it this way, kind of too powerful even for the level that they're at. So you actually end up having some advantage firing against targets that are at least slightly angled to you, because then at least you get detonations within the ship. You don't have as much of a problem with battleships. Obviously, they have enough armor that it kind of slows the shell down as it actually hits. But like this Königsberg, I'll be real lucky to score a whole lot of much, even at this range. Particularly when you're close before the shell velocity starts to really drop off. You are going to run into a lot of situations where things don't quite work out. Now, I will briefly address that the situation that I'm in right now is not great. This was a team that I wasn't really 100% sure what they wanted to do with life. They were definitely not super interested in capturing bases, and they basically left me out to dry over there on the far east end. So at this point, I'm retreating across the entire map towards C in hopes of having a little bit more luck. In the interim, I guess you could argue, TacticAngel, you really should have turned around when you saw those two cruisers and they were coming to support you. Yeah, I don't know. What you will notice is the accuracy here is pretty suspect. I do have the greatest accuracy build that I can make with the Mutsu in this replay. And I have shown the commander on the screen just so you know what I'm working with. Some other things will come up regarding those decisions a little bit later, but I'll talk to those points when I get there. So as you see here, we're picking up the Queen Elizabeth. It looks like it's turning around and also sailing backwards. I do manage a pretty decent shot, and you can see there, if you do land shots with the Mutsu, particularly against other battleships, you can do a pretty decent amount of damage even with minimal shell hits. If you manage to hit with several shells, like, good on you, buddy, because you can do just a ton of damage. Here we're using the shell follow cam. That's preset number 2 that I use. It's also available, I believe, on preset number 1. I get that question a little bit, a lot, kind of all the time. In any case, we're still heading over towards C. We've got a whole lot of things happening to us. There you see the Fuso just kind of punched through my side as though it was nothing. And I can pretty much do the same thing to him if I could hit him. Now, I leave most of this in relatively real time so that you can kind of gauge. You know, TacticAngel, a lot of times your accuracy is fairly suspect, and I understand that. I kind of feel like that's a real easy shot. He's starting to move forward. Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. Now, if you did all of the things that you needed to do to make RNG love you, then that could have been a one shot. It could have been 8 misses. I ended up somewhere in between. a little bit closer to the low end. I'm just trying to sneak these shots in before he disappears. I get a better result. And the closer you get, the better the result you're going to get. Obviously. Against battleships, up into a point. Against cruisers, once you get within like 6-8 kilometers, you start punching through them pretty easily by yourself. So I'm continuing to put shells in on that Fuso. There you see another pretty decent hit. We don't do anything really special there, but you know, this is the sort of chip damage that you can get with a high damage ship. We are still struggling in terms of actually playing the game. We have managed to finally recover our hit points in terms of damage. You see we put a real big shot in on that Fuso as it's running away. And as we capture the base, we're going to speed this up. I'm not 100% sure what my teammates are doing here, because it kind of seems like they're pathologically against the idea of capturing bases and are really, really more interested in kind of sailing around and doing silly things. But we finally do manage to capture this base. And at this point, we're looking at the score. We're looking at B being captured. And we know at this point there's really nothing that we can do to win this game other than sink the last 2 remaining ships. Now I have 2 allies that should theoretically help me. I'm going up against a full strength Isizuchi, but I can quickly change that with a couple of lucky hits. And this one shot is the reason why you play this ship. And if you're willing to keep rolling the dice until you roll the hard 6, then great. If you're not, then, I understand. I have a lot of trouble with this ship. We're going to see as we come up here a couple of demonstrations. One is kind of the maneuverability that this ship offers you. The other is kind of the firepower that it can also dish out. And there's one other thing that we're going to cover, and that's one of the vulnerabilities of this ship. It's not really a stat that you see, kind of like the dispersion of the shells being pretty bad on the Nagato. The chance to be set on fire seems to be pretty real in this. Now, it is not at all helped by the fact that I'm playing a maximum accuracy battleship and I'm going into a knife fight at close range. Essentially, I'm more vulnerable to fire than I ought to be, but I've noticed that this ship just gets caught on fire all the time, regardless of who my commander is. It's only made worse by the choices I've made here. And as much as I want to say part of this is my fault, I've had the best result in this kind of setup, because you want to stay at medium, if not long range, and use your guns to really chew people up, though you do have low accuracy. Now, what you see here is me kind of reacting to where I expect the torpedoes to be. Pretty impressive. Keep in mind this footage is ever so slightly sped up, so it's not quite that good. I nearly finished off the Nuremberg. I have 3 fires on me. I put them out, and now we're gonna try to focus on this Isizuchi. We have lost one of our cruisers in the meantime, and at this point we're getting into desperation territory. We're gonna finally see what the torpedo arcs are on this, because I consider these to be a weapon of last resort. I would highly consider trying to not think of this ship as even having torpedoes, because if you want to incorporate them into your gameplay, it's not going to work out very well for you. I unfortunately have lost one of the torpedo launchers on that side. That happens actually quite a bit. I don't think they have too many hit points. And if we can just get a real good hit in on this Isizuchi, we can finally seal the deal and somehow win this game. In the last 10 seconds I shoot an island, and then I die. So this is a little bit emblematic of how I feel about this ship all in total, but I did show you how it can put up the good fight. It can do a lot of damage if you get lucky. If you're into that kind of ship, if you like how the Nagato plays, this kind of ship might appeal to you, but honestly, this isn't really my cup of tea. There you see we do 137,000 damage. We earn a pretty respectable amount of experience in spite of our loss, and end up on the top of our team, which obviously lost. But I hope you found this somewhat informative. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.